I'm Melissa Banczak, and welcome to episode 66 of Books Cubed, the show where I chat with authors you should be reading. It is Thursday, June 11th, 2020, and I'm dying to know what you're reading. So drop down to the comments and click on that link. It will take you over to the YouTube page. That's okay. Leave your comment there. That way I'll see it. And I will need some new books soon. I am currently reading a lot of science fiction, and it is wonderful. I will read anything really. Um, it doesn't matter. Let me know. What is your favorite? Are you an author? Do I need to read your book? Let me know. I need to know. Okay, let's get right to the show. I, I've been sitting in my office too long, obviously. And you can see when the show starts, I've got my Millennium Falcon background. I forgot to change it. That's what I usually have on the computer. I write in a Zoom group every afternoon, and we all have funky backgrounds. And that's the one I usually use, which is what you'll see during the interview. So I'm going to get right to it. I am talking with Michele Berger. We're talking speculative fiction. It is really great chat. I had a great time talking with her. Her book is perfect for these times. I don't want to go too much into it because I want you to be surprised and find it out as we're chatting. So let's get right to it, and I'll see you after. I want to thank Michele for coming on today. And before we do anything, I'm going to start with her bio. I always say, oh, I'll do the bio when I do the intro, and then I always forget. So, okay, so Michele Tracy Berger is a professor, a creative writer, a creativity coach, and a pug lover. Oh, I love pugs too. That's me. Okay, her main love is writing speculative fiction, though she's also known to write poetry and creative nonfiction too. Her fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Concrete Dreams, Witches, Warriors, and Wise Women. Ooh, I'm not going to say that right. What is the fantasy collection of Fromth?
Afro Myth?
Thank you. I must say it wrong. I need new glasses, and the type is really small. But anyway, let's get back to her bio. Stories We Tell After Midnight, Uncommon Origins, a collection of gods, monsters, nature, and science, Flying South, a literary journal, 100-word stories, Thing magazine, Blood and Bourbon. Oh, I like that. Faya, F-I-Y-A, magazine of Black speculative fiction, and the Red Clay Review. Her nonfiction writing and poetry have appeared in the Chapel Hill News, Glint Literary Journal, Oracle Fine Arts Review, Trivia, Voices of Feminism, The Feminist Wire, Ms. Magazine, Carolina Women Magazine, Western North Shore Women. Oh my gracious, you have tons. Okay, tons. Let's see, there was one here, Luminescent Threads, Connections to Octavia Butler. In various designs. She runs an award-winning blog called The Practice of Creativity. Her science fiction novella, Reenu-You, was recently published by Falstaff Books. I'm sorry. My daughter went to Flagstaff University, so my mind immediately went there. And that's the one we're going to be talking about today, especially. Much of her work explores psychological horror, especially through issues of race and gender. She's currently a trustee on board of the North Carolina Writers Network and president-elect of the North Carolina Literary and Historical Association. Okay, so welcome today. Wow, you are very prolific with your stories. Short stories?
Short stories. Thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here. And it's, for a long period of time, I didn't believe that I could write short stories. And the novella, which we'll talk about in a minute, actually came out of a 400,000 word failed novel. And I had always wanted to write novels and worked on novels, but was told 20 years ago one way to move up the writing ladders to write short stories, and writing short fiction is a really great craft. It's really great training, but it's very different than writing novels. So it's only been in the last I would say 10 years that, and really last 6 years, that the more of my like flash fiction and everything I used to write came out like a novella, and so I had to really learn how to hone it. So
tell everybody what flash fiction is, because not everyone knows what flash fiction is.
So flash fiction, usually it's anywhere from 2,500 words all the way down to 100 words. and everything is very compressed. I mean, it has a beginning, middle, and end, but it's a compressed story. And there are so many places for emerging writers. Flash fiction and really working in that form is a great way to actually get published, because there's many venues that accept, flash fiction. And the sweet spot, as you know, is that 2,000 to 6,000 word for short stories. And I remember one of my teachers, because I just could not quite grasp all of this, and she said, well, writing a short story is like having a wonderful dinner party, and there's a beginning, a middle, and end, and people have appetizers and they're talking, and then it ends. And what I realized is that the reason why my short fiction wasn't coming out very short is that all of my characters in some ways slept over. It was like, the party just extended. So I had to really figure out how to what an idea was that could be worked successfully within short fiction.
Yeah, short fiction is hard. I have just
Yes.
started writing short fiction, and a good friend of mine, Lisa, who co-wrote a series of prompt books with me, she writes flash fiction all the time, 100 words.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
she's published a lot, and she's award-winning. And I'm just in awe of anybody who can write a short story, because I'm like you. I read or write a short story, and I want to write another 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000 words with those characters. Or I read, a friend of mine, Lori, she's been on the show a couple times. She's written a short story inside an anthology of horror books. And every time I see her, I say, 3 books. I want 3 books on those characters. She's like, it's a short story. Leave me alone. But that's what I want. But yeah, it's hard.
It really is. And I think part of it is also, I like to play with structure, and also with voice. And so, you really don't have that. I mean, you can do very innovative things in flash fiction, don't get me wrong, but you don't have that kind of length in terms of like multiple viewpoints and, playing with structure. So trying to really figure out, how can I tell the story economically and with an emotional punch. And, a lot of short fiction, it doesn't have to resolve in some ways as completely as, when someone has gone on a journey with you for a short story or a novel.
Yeah. Have you listened to Joyce Carol Oates' masterclass?
No, and it's funny because I am a masterclass, I don't want to say fanatic, but I have listened to many of the authors, starting with Margaret Atwood, because I literally, this is not one of the questions when, we were talking about what we might talk about. Usually people ask about your influences, like Margaret Atwood, amongst other writers, if there was such a thing as an evil spirit, and it came up and it said, look, I will allow you to write like Margaret Atwood if you would give me a limb or a piece of your liver or something. I would really consider that. But I started with Margaret Atwood, and then did Neil Gaiman, but I have not done Joyce Carol Oates. And so
I mentioned her because you talk about structure, and she really goes. I mean, she's the short story queen. So she talks about different ways to get that. I'm not even going to give it justice, but I highly recommend her class. Whoops. Okay, we still there? Do I still have you? Because it says my internet connection is unstable. I'm having terrible problems with the internet, and we are working off my internet. I'm hooked into my cell phone, which has like 1 bar. Oh God, it's got 2. We might be
we
okay.
are adaptable. Writers are nothing if they're not adaptable.
You have to be. You have to be. So let me read. Your book, Reenu-You, deals with hair. I mean, it deals with a lot of things, but hair to me is so important. I love history. I studied history in college, and looking at photos from different time periods. I mean, the first thing you notice about anybody is their hair. It tells you so much about where they're from, what their culture is, what time period it is. Hair repeats. I mean, you see hair from the 20s showing up again in the 60s. I mean, hair always comes back again, just like fashion does. But hair is just so, it's so personal. It says so much about a person. And I was so fascinated by the way you used hair in the book. So I'm gonna just really quickly read. The book is called Reenu-You. It's Reenu dash YOU. Couldn't think of what the word dash was. Oh, brother. Okay, so Reenu-You. Okay. What if a visit to a salon could kill you? What if a hair product harbored a deadly virus? Kat is an out-of-work ski instructor who just wants to pack up her deceased mother's things, leave New York, and return to Aspen. Constancia, did I say that right?
Yes, you
Constancia is a
did.
talented but troubled young woman who just wants to start her first semester of college. In different shops across New York City, they and hundreds of other women of color try a new hair relaxer called Renew-You. Then things start to go horribly wrong. Within days, they find themselves covered in purple scab-like lesions, a rash that pulses, oozes, and spreads in spiral patterns. They're at the epicenter of a mysterious virus spreading throughout the city. As the outbreak spreads and new cases pop up in Black and Latino communities throughout New York, panic, anger, and questions fill the streets. What is this virus and where does it come from? Is it corporate malfeasance? Or is this an orchestrated plot to kill minority women? In the face of terrifying and uncertain future, Kat, Constancia, and a small band of other affected women are forced to confront their deepest fears to save themselves and others. As the world crumbles around them, they will discover more about each other, learn about themselves, and draw strength to face the future together. Renew-You looks at social and political meanings of hair, female friendships, and viruses. And the virus thing, kind of appropriate, considering we're now hitting our second wave of COVID. So if you're listening in the future, today, what is today? I don't even know what the day is. It's the middle of June. I'll look later. And 2020, and COVID is coming back. So when you wrote this, did you have any idea about pandemics?
Well, a couple of things. And you're right that hair and adornment is such an important part of who we are. It's also gendered, it's racialized. And for me, at least in speculative fiction, I grew up reading a lot of fantasy. No one was talking, people always talk about long, tresses, but no one talked about who were the stylists, who was doing hair, right? And I think the fact that that as a kind of a body politics was so left out was of interest to me. But what the kernel of the story actually came from, it was actually, I started writing in the 1990s, and there was a real product on the market, and it was called Rio, and they did infomercials. So this is in the 1990s when infomercials were relatively new, and they basically marketed it as an all natural hair relaxer, right? And that was a big deal. And I remember they actually had models, like swiping their fingers in and saying it's so good that you can eat it. This was also at the time of the rise of everything being labeled green and healthy and organic. So I took that idea and, I was sort of watching this just as a consumer. And then what happened, there was a class action lawsuit filed about a year and a half later, mostly, but not solely, by women of color. And basically, they found that the product had even higher ingredients that were unhealthy for people than an average hair care product. And in women's hairs, the scalps were terribly burned. All of that was happening. And so, for me, it was to extrapolate that idea and magnify it, right? And to, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm someone who grew up also during HIV/AIDS. And if we think back to that moment, we didn't really know a lot about viruses. Is also we didn't know a lot about HIV/AIDS, and we also couldn't communicate the way that we did. So the novella is set in the 1990s for a reason, and I wanted to kind of play with conspiracy theories, some of the racial and gender issues, and also kind of health disparities, because it seems to manifest initially as a rash and it gets misdiagnosed, and so all of that unfolds. And I think the other thing I will say is that for me it was important to kind of have this be around collective female friendship, because a lot of sci-fi tropes, as wonderful as, like, for example, as wonderful as Wonder Woman is, it's like one woman and a bunch of dudes, and I loved Wonder Woman. I saw it twice, right? And also, you know, when we see, at least in movies, when we have an ensemble cast, it usually is one person who is kind of othered. So you have like historically, you know, the Black person, the Latino person, and then all white people, or, you know, all men and one woman. And I really wanted to kind of play with that and shift that, because collective female friendship is really important. So, and I want to tell a good story, but yeah, hair is as you said, it's also, it's political, it's cultural, it's all of those things. And so it's a fun place to play in terms of being a writer with this, in this genre.
Yeah, it really is. I really like the fact that it was women, 5 women from different, economic, I can't even speak today, economic backgrounds and walks of life. And when they all got together, and I don't want to give the story away because it's 174 pages,
It's
147.
short. It's I think 30,000 words. It's a novella. So
Yeah, I don't want to give much away, but at one point they are all holed up. So I'm going to give a little away. At one point they're holed up in one woman's home, and they're all talking. And as they're talking and they're arguing and trying to figure out what's going on and what they're going to do, and each of them, they're all kind of butting heads because they all come from different situations, and they all, it's tough on them all. But I really like that all these women were together, and you got those different points of view, and you got these women helping each other. And you're right. You look at so many of these things, and I'm guilty too of that. I mean, I write. I have a character in my series. I write. She's very selfish, and it's her and her arch nemesis Morgan, who's a guy, and his dog. Well, I'm on the 3rd book now, and I've started adding more characters, and I like the idea that as she goes farther along, she becomes a better person. She learns. She's getting, and the second book, the last book I did, she made some friends, sort of. And this book, she makes more friends.
mm,
She's starting to get out and learn people's names and things like that. But you're right. You look at what did I watch the other day? I watched some movie the other day. It was 1 woman and 4 guys. I'm thinking, okay, come on. Come on. Why can't we have 4 women and 1 guy? Because the women can do pretty much anything the guys can.
absolutely.
Seriously.
Absolutely. And I like that, you know, talking about character change. It's fun to play characters off each other. And so, you know, Kat and Constancia are very different. Kat is
Yes.
biracial. She is a skier, you know, grew up in New York, but doesn't really like New York City particularly. And Constancia is Puerto Rican. She's younger, you know, and has a, you know, a bit of a chip on her shoulder when we meet her. And so I liked that. And I also, but trying to balance that, balance the tension and also the time. There's, you know, as you said, part of the novella is set in a place where people are talking to each other, but trying to balance that with action and moving the story along, right? Like that's also really important. And that's also can be a challenge too.
It is, as a writer, that's the biggest thing. Every word that you write, it should advance your story. Every
Yes.
single word. It should bring
Yes.
the reader forward. So that,
Yes.
that kind of brings me to something that we talk about a lot on the show is reader expectation.
Mm.
So you're right, speculative fiction. I haven't read a lot of speculative science fiction. I love science fiction. Well, I'll read anything. I'm just a book fiend. Anybody puts a book in front of me, I'm going to read it.
I'm
With
right there with
this
you.
small exception of romance, I don't really read too much romance, but if
I
it's recommended.
and paranormal romance that has a bit of horror. I'm like, okay, I can get with that now. But we'll come back to that.
That might be a way to go for me. Yeah. And I have read some really good, I've interviewed some really good romance authors on here, but it's not my go-to. But uh, I think because as a reader, I expect it to be kind of boring, like very soap opera because it's all about love and romance and finding someone and that kind of thing. So that's what I expect if I pick up a romance book. So do you, as you're writing, what else do you write besides speculative?
So I write a sort of I write across the speculative fiction universe. So kind of modern fantasy, you know, sci-fi, magical realism, horror. But I also write what is sort of thought as, you know, realistic fiction, as well as creative nonfiction. I think that the challenge is that, for me, I'm really attentive to language, and so I come out of a um, kind of a literary oriented tradition. So whatever I do, I want to refine that language. So that's really important. But um, people are coming to, I think, sort of genre fiction with high expectations, because there are amazing people, writing at a very high level. But there are some readers who, are not necessarily looking, if they see something that's sort of labeled, virus and epidemic, they might be expecting a thriller paced kind of story. Now, I feel like my story has kind of thriller elements because you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think trying to, balance out what in terms of, if you're writing in a genre, what are the expectations readers are coming to, and then how can you subvert them? How can you play with them? So I'll just, as a side note about romance, that you mentioned that, the oh my goodness, I'm going to blank on on the name of the movie. There was a thriller, sort of an action adventure movie that really subverted the genre, and it was really about a man and his love for his dead wife. And of course, it had Keanu Reeves in it. I don't know if this sounds. Of course, I'll remember it probably when we're off air.
Oh, yeah,
And what was
yeah.
so great about it is that it yes, it's all action adventure, but the driving theme is the passion he has for his dead wife. And so I feel like there are ways that storytellers, we have to be mindful of conventions and then try to subvert them. And the other thing I'll say is that, for me at least, the first draft is always for me, the first couple of drafts. And then you really have to take a hard look as you're revising, as you know, and really say, is this what the reader wants to know? Is this what the reader's expecting? Is it fun for the reader? Or is it really about your own sense of things that you want to put in there? And I've become much more conscious of that in the last couple of years, and really tried to work on that in my storytelling.
Yeah, you're right. You have to think about, what does the reader expect? And it's I think is it John Wick? Is that the movie?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, thank you. I love Keanu Reeves. I can't believe I blanked on that film.
I
Yes, and
think
have you seen that? Have you seen the
yes,
first one?
I love John Wick. I love Keanu Reeves, and I think the funniest line was something about, "You killed my dog, you killed my wife," or so. And it just made me think of a country song. But I love Keanu Reeves so much. Did you
It's true.
see?
And the first 5 minutes, or the first 8 minutes, with the dog, and I'm hopefully we're not giving any spoilers, but
Yeah,
it's really powerful. And then that drives, even though there's a lot of action adventure, it's really his connection to his dead wife and the dead dog. And it's really a smart movie. Now the other ones that have come,
yeah.
different,
It
but
is. It is. And I guess it had. I was just reading the other day that they had a title for it that wasn't John Wick, but he kept forgetting the title and calling it John Wick, so they just changed the name.
oh, that's great. I did not know that.
Yeah. No, I love Keanu Reeves. And God, what was I just thinking? I was thinking of another. Oh, he was in, oh God, in a Netflix movie
Yes. Oh my goodness, you're reading my mind, Melissa.
where he
Always
played the
be
love interest of the lady.
Yes, always be my maybe. The one is that
Something,
what you're
yeah,
thinking
something
of?
like
Yeah,
that.
that.
Oh
Yes,
my God. I love the
yes,
two leads in it, and I can't think of their
yes.
names.
I can't think of their names, but for those of you watching, and that's another one that, the structure is kind of a romantic comedy, which normally I would not be that interested in, but it's told through two different, particularly Asian American perspectives, the actors, and it sort of flips the script around gender, and then of course Keanu Reeves is in it, so it feels very fresh, even though when you probably look at the structure, it's very much like boy meets girl meets boy, loses boy, and comes back together.
Yeah. Yeah. And romance, thinking about that, my favorite movie is Notting Hill. And I
Oh,
am not
okay.
a chick flick kind of girl. I like where somebody kills a cast of 10,000. That is my kind of movie. But I think I like Notting Hill because it's from his perspective.
I
It's
have
not
not
from the
seen that yet.
women's, and so it's something that you don't see all the time, you know? And his character was such a great character, and the roommate was so fantastic. The guy who worked in the bookshop with him was fantastic. It was there are the connections unstable again. Maybe we'll be okay. But yeah, I think I like it when you turn it upside down and you do something different. And maybe that's why reverse harem which I just heard about not too long ago. It's where it's a woman who has a bunch of guys.
I think so, and that
I
has
think that's
been.
it. So that's not something that you normally see. So I can see why readers would be like, this is really great, because it totally turns it on its head and it's totally different. So you come from an academic background.
Mm-hmm. That's how
And
I,
what
that's how I keep a roof over my head. Yes, I'm trained as an academic. I have a PhD in political science, and I do work in women's and gender studies and sociology, and so that's, yeah. And
that's
I've
interesting.
had
And
a
that
very
came in handy with your book there.
I would say, in college I was really torn. Between, and this is early 90s, wanting to, because I was a political studies major and a creative writing minor, and I think part of me wanted to go and pursue an MFA, but at the time I thought that I had this kind of warped idea about discipline, and that I wasn't disciplined enough. As it turns out, I think that was the right choice at that time, given MFA programs and all of that. But I also really wanted to do research, and so I went right out of undergrad into grad school. And the thing about graduate school is that it's rigorous training. And in my mind, I thought, well, I will be able to be a professor and I'll be able to write, I'll do all the, teaching and research, but I'll also be able to write creatively. Now that that was not true. So it took me a long time to make more space for the creative life.
Yeah, I've got friends that are academics, and yeah, it's the same thing. I have no time to write. They're pulling their hair out. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. So trying to, yeah, and being an academic that pays the bills, but you still want to be creative
And
and put out the books.
I do love the work. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how do you, now a lot of writers, we go in our office and we write, or we go in our corner and we write, and our family kind of looks at us like, why do you do that? Do you have issues without, going into too much personal detail, for family members who may not like it? How does your family deal with, but then go ahead and tell us, how does your family deal with your needing to be your creative side?
Well, I'm very, very fortunate that I grew up in a family that, in terms of my family of origin, very creative, supportive. And my sister, actually, we have talked about, we're trying to write together. My sister's a fantastic storyteller. She did not pursue writing in the way that I did, but we're trying to work on stuff. Now in my personal life currently, my partner of 20 years is I can't even imagine how people who don't have supportive partners or spouses or significant others manage, because he is completely supportive and engaged, and often he'll be not necessarily my first reader, but at some point I usually talk over ideas with him, and get his perspective, and but he's completely supportive. He does, there are times where he when you kind of go into the real writing cave, so he'll tease me, he'll call me meanie McWriter. He even had like a little a little lyric going there for a while, but that is a good moment where I need to emerge. But overall, just he's completely supportive. So I think to have that somewhere in your personal life is really important, because it most people do not understand that a lot of times, as as a writer, you're in some ways, part of your brain is always filtering the information around you for something you're working on, right? So to try to cultivate and encourage people to understand what that means, but then when you're not writing, I think that's the other thing, to really be present with the people in your life, right? So to try to be efficient in your writing. I think that's another key piece. So, I think you might have mentioned this earlier, but my book was originally published through a small but mighty in spirit company called Book Smugglers, and they're still around. They do a lot of reviewing and just wonderful, but they got out of the publishing business, and John Hartness, the editor for Falstaff Books, and I love the cover. Unfortunately, I don't have the old cover. I love the cover. It had like this funky shaped bottle of Reenu-You, which I describe in the book on it, and all this, sort of abstract representations of women in hair. And he looked at it, he's like, this conveys nothing about New York. It conveys nothing about, viruses. And so he immediately redid the cover, he's there. He and his team were wonderful to work with, but that moment of really understanding differences and how people look at your work, and to not take it personally, and I think that's really, really important. So it sounds like, I think I would probably get overwhelmed, because literary agents, you have to read just tons and tons and tons of stuff all the time, and it's hard work.
It was, and it was just so emotionally draining. Anytime deals fell through or books were not sold, and it was too much for me. And after 5 years, my boss had retired and they kept trying to get me to go to LA to work in the LA office. And I'm like, I went to LA once and my eyes watered when I got off the train. I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back. So I would go to Toronto sometimes, and I had clients in Toronto. You swallow the T, Toronto. I get yelled at by locals. You don't say it right. Sorry. Toronto. And I love Toronto. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. I probably should have June, my character, do something in Toronto one of these times. But it was just too much for me. And I felt like, people wouldn't listen. I mean, I had somebody often, several clients who would say, you have 2 weeks to sell it. It's like,
oh my gosh. Wow.
It's like, no. And
that doesn't work like that. It doesn't usually work.
I know.
Like
and
that.
I had a couple of clients that were related to one of the huge directors in Hollywood, and I still couldn't sell their script. So it was just nuts.
I will tell you, just kind of going back for a moment, so one of my favorite cities is London. So I would say I need to set something there, just as an aside, because I love it.
Have you spent a lot of time there?
Well, it was funny. I went there like 25 or more years ago, went right between college and grad school. And, I was visiting my German boyfriend over there who was living there at the time. And we just, we didn't have a lot of resources, but it was so much fun. And as a New Yorker, I was like, the style, the fashion, like I just loved it. But I didn't really care that much about the history at the time. Like I wasn't, so into the history, but I went back in 2016, right 2 days after Brexit had passed, like, or two or 3 days, and discovered the British, museum, and we went to Charles Dickens' house, and it just, the kind of the weight of the history, I was much more attentive to that, and also not being like a poor recently graduated college student helped too, but just so I am sort of fascinated and enthralled by the history in ways that I wasn't, when I was a young person. So I feel like I could spend time there and in the UK as more broadly.
I think we need a little bit of time out in the world before you appreciate things, and getting out and meeting people from different cultures. One of my absolute favorite things, was in Toronto. We went to Queensland Park or Queen's Park. I forget which it's called. And we just put a blanket, my friend and I, we used to go on vacation every year together. And we just put a blanket out and just laid in the grass and listened to all the different accents from around the world. And it was like enriching for the soul.
Absolutely.
It was, Absolutely. I love, and as a person who was deaf for so long, and this is when I could still hear, this is before I totally lost my hearing, listening to accents. I love accents. And I always want to say to people, oh my God, where are you from? But I'm always worried they'll think that I'm going to yell at them, go back to your country, which I'm not going to do. And I need to preface it with, your language is beautiful. Where are you from? That's what I need to remember to do. Because I don't want to, I tend to be kind of overwhelming. We had, for years, I love Girl Scout cookies. And for years, no Girl Scout came to my house. And we lived on the second floor apartment. And this Girl Scout came to my door, and I came out and went, oh my God, I'm so excited. And I scared the hell out of her. And she went running back down the stairs to her mother. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Come back. I think I bought a case from her.
Oh, that's like the beginning of a horror story.
Yes. But I tend to be a little too much. I try to
Oh,
calm myself down. But
enthusiasm is so good. Is Yeah, we need that. We need more of that.
yeah, maybe we'll see. but right now I live in Florida, in Central Florida, and we've got people from all over the world, huge Jamaican and Dominican Republic and Haitian, and we've got Russian voices, and oh gosh, Spanish, and I know some Spanish from living in Tucson,
Mm.
and it takes me so long to translate that the person has lost interest and walked away. By the time I can try to think of a reply, because I can do it, but then I don't trust myself enough to just say the words. I know what I'm saying.
That's
But
right.
then I get
That's
worried I'm
right.
going to say it wrong, and you know, and
Well,
like my no, go
and I don't
ahead.
know if you've been to Spain, but
No,
it's also just growing up in New York City and hearing different, particularly across the gamut of Spanish accents, and then traveling to Mexico versus Spain, and hearing it in your ear, very different. Yeah, very
very
different.
different, very different. When I lived in
And Cuba,
Tucson,
and Cuba,
yes,
I've
yes, yes, it's all very, and Cuban. That's what we get a lot. We have a lot here too, is Cuban, and the Spanish accent or the Spanish slang is so different in Tucson. And so I worked at this place, and I dealt with a lot of custom. About 10% of our customers spoke Spanish, and I got tired of saying in Spanish, "Please hold for." Whatever the girl's name was who spoke Spanish. And I thought, surely I can learn some Spanish. So I signed for a Spanish class at the college. The teacher was from Argentina. And it's like, no, yes, you speak Spanish, but it's not the right Spanish. And
right.
at one point, she had said to me, if you say cocoa as brown, I think it was, everyone will laugh at you. And I went back to Anita. I went back to Anita. I said, this is what she said. And she said, she's an idiot. Stop listening to this woman. And just the cultural differences, the slang, you have to know the slang for the area or for that because there's Spanish spoken, like you said, in a lot of places.
Well, and I
But
and I and I think that's important, for us as writers too, in terms of trying to, capture different kinds of idioms and dialects, and depending on where you're setting your story, and knowing. I mean, we both live in the South. I live in North Carolina, and you know people who are from and live in the mountains of western mountains of North Carolina, very different than people who live near the beach in terms of the sounds, or people who grow up in the Triangle or the Piedmont area, and sort of being mindful of that. And I think that's really important in terms of us, in terms of writing and what we bring to the page.
oh, it is. Yeah, you have to. They say write what you know and you research things, but I think it's important to. I know. Somebody said that to me the other day. Write what you should only write what you know, and I said, "Oh my God! If you wrote what you know, you'd write nothing. You
That's
know,
right.
you'd be
Right, right.
like, you'd be
I
really
really like,
boring."
like, write what you're passionate about. So
Yes.
one, something that's a project that's on the burner that I'm trying to get to is a cozy mystery, which is how we connect a little through the Career Author Summit. Because I love mysteries, I love thrillers and crime and all of that. But it deals with fashion, and I love fashion and fashion history, and so I think write what you know and write what write what you're passionate about, and that you want to know more, and then you bring in what you know. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and I brought that into Reenu-You, New York City, a particular moment. But I'm also interested in lots of things. So I think you're right. You don't want to get stuck on just what you know, because that's just you're going to have to do research no matter what. And so,
Yeah.
write what you're interested in and passionate
Oh,
about.
oh, most definitely, most definitely. And you can come up with all kinds of amazing things. Look at read the newspaper and grab some headlines and mash them together, and you've got you know amazing stuff. Do people read newspapers anymore?
They read them online. Yeah, they read them online.
Yeah, we used to get, I don't think I've gotten the newspapers since I lived in Key West. And I got it because the Key West newspaper is hysterical to read. In you open the second page, and they will list, people can write in and bitch about things, and I forget what they call the column.
Oh,
So
wow.
you'll have things like, somebody bitched in there about, people keep throwing dog poop in my trash can. I live on Key Haven. They keep throwing dog poop in my trash can. And I almost, because that was probably me, because our trash can was at the curb 24/7. And I almost wrote, well, our neighborhood values will increase if you would put your trash cans back up to your house 6 days a week, but I didn't. But, just little things, I saw somebody do this, or just little bitches, and it's hysterical. And there's a lot of machete crime in Key
Oh,
West.
wow. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that a couple of years ago, my friends and I, we went on our first cruise ever, and we stopped at the Keys or Key West, and amazing. Talk about I mean, touristy, but also kind of magical if you get off the beaten path. But I think people read exactly that. There are so many local, more like, monthly really circulars that are kind of like newspapers that come to people's homes, and they read those if they're not, and or read the national news, online.
Yeah. Yeah. It just got to be that, it just, I don't know. I try to avoid the news. It gives me a headache. And then and that and social media. I mean, I like social media, but I get too involved and then I don't write. So it's just, and so I look, and I haven't written anything on social media in like a month. And I think, oh, I've really got to write something. So
Well,
this
and
is good. At least I post about my show once a week.
you're on Twitter and Instagram.
Not Twitter. I
No,
mean, I have an account, but I don't.
you don't
And
write.
I love Twitter because the people on Twitter are smart and they're
Mm-hmm.
quick. They have a quick
Mm-hmm.
wit and they're smart. And I'm more on Instagram. I like dog pictures and the beach and um, books. I can always find new books to read being on Instagram. Um, it just, yeah, I found myself, I had gotten to where I was just too much in social media, and I didn't write for a long time. And so I have a hard time doing both. I mean, like, I've got a schedule up on my board of things to
Mm,
post on social media every day. I think I've done
ditto.
one day, and it's been on my board for 2 months. So
Oh, okay. Right. Well, and also it's like, it's that expansive, at some point I think we get like, we're doing all the platforms and then trying to figure out, really what we can do authentically and consistently. I have an author Facebook page that I go almost every other day, to try to post something. And Twitter, I like, and you're right, it's, I feel like I need to be not careful, but I need to be mindful, because it's easy to just tweet something, off the cuff, and really you really want to use your knowledge and insight. So and then my blog, The Practice of Creativity, there I for many many years, it's, every Sunday. I missed a Sunday this week, but or last week, but that was, we've had exceptional times, but usually,
yeah,
but I think I'm on Instagram, but I'm not as active. So I also feel like it's where you can be consistent. And the more important thing is the writing. I mean, it's always that.
yeah, it really is. It is. I'm working right now on an interactive story. So,
Oh,
and I'm hoping to
exciting.
have it up. I keep saying soon, but it's through Messenger. So then you sign up on Messenger, and then you try to, and it's short. And I want to do several, throughout the year, where you try to. My character's not the swiftest chick, and she's rather selfish. So I mean, her first thought is always herself. Though she does come through, and she cares about her family, and she does the right thing, but she doesn't want to because she's busy. She manages her brother's affairs. He's famous, and she takes care of him behind the scenes. So, but this is, in the book, you laugh at June's stupidity, but how much better can you do in her shoes? So then,
I
as
like that.
June, you read the book and you decide what are you going to do. If you do this, you're going to get made fun of, possibly. If you do this, what's going to happen. If you do this, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm working on right now, and I'm kind of spending more time. I'm taking a class on how to do messenger bots.
That
So,
sounds fun.
and
Count me
it's
in as this is Facebook Messenger.
yes, Facebook
Yeah, yeah.
Messenger.
'Cause that's now that that's how people can, I like it's easier to me to interact there sometimes than just email. I get so tired and over, but I will respond. So I think that's really brilliant, doing something
Yeah,
through Messenger.
I saw someone had done it, and I started it like 2 years ago. And I still haven't made it live yet.
Well, things take
Uh,
a while to incubate and to,
yeah,
get to the
yeah,
point where you're ready to launch them. So
yeah. I keep saying my next newsletter is going to be ready so they can dive in, and then it's not ready. Um, but I've managed to put out. Let's see, we've done 8 books now, so 6 are nonfiction, but still, they were a lot of work. And I had some. Lisa and I did a series of writing prompt where you roll dice to get your writing prompts. And I had somebody say to me, "So you just took a bunch of lists off of the internet?" And I said, "I wish. No, my sweet, no." We worked together for months, to get everything. And no, I would have loved to have sat down and had a list given to me. Like,
well,
no.
and it's such a unique way of coming up with prompts and writing too. I think that's when you come up with something really good, it takes a while to kind of organize it, but then it's really good and it's out
Yeah,
there.
yeah, and it's fun. It's fun. I want to write more short stories. I want to. My biggest thing is being able to write a short story. I think in I love Masterclass. Going back to that again, I think it was Neil Gaiman maybe who said, "Consider the short story as the last chapter of your book." I thought,
That I still ponder that, Melissa,
yes,
because he's like it could be the beginning. Right, the last piece of your short story could be the beginning of a novel, basically, or the end of it. Like he was like
yeah,
it was just
yeah,
so it makes me when I read short stories now, since hearing that, I do try to think about that, but it's like, yeah, he's if you have not taken
yeah.
we
If
do
you
not
if
get
you
paid for this, but if you have not taken Neil Gaiman's masterclass, we would recommend it.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And a while ago, they were doing a special where for $180, you bought the masterclass series, all of the series, and you could have a friend join you for free. So, of course, then your friend gives you $90, which is what happened with me. A friend of mine said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Yes," because I'd been dying to take so many of the classes. I mean, God, Misty Copeland teaches ballet. Oh my
Yes,
God, I
I
love
haven't
Misty
had a chance.
Copeland. Oh,
Yeah, she's amazing. And
oh.
and I like that they just have a range of, Bobby Brown teaches, makeup and foundations of makeup, and people are on there around, Anna Wintour on fashion, and
Yeah,
yeah,
Gordon Ramsay has 2 cooking classes.
yes, yeah, it's
So
it's it's pretty amazing. It's a great resource.
it truly is. It truly is. And Chris, the astronaut who used to play
Um,
guitar at the space station, he's got a master
yes,
class.
yes, I have not looked at that one yet, but yeah.
Yeah. So
But again, this is a challenge. It's like balancing out the learning and the reading, and then the writing. I mean, that's something I think we all struggle with, because there's the ever expanding set of writing workshops, especially now that we're mostly at home, um, trying to balance out that craft building, and also just building your business with the actual writing.
yeah, and the whole, at some point you got to stop researching and write.
Yes.
Yeah, for my last book, I researched the Coast Guard, and I spent a couple months researching and reading all about the Coast Guard. And I think the Coast Guard appears in like 300 words worth of the book. It's like, why did I spend all that time on the Coast Guard? And I interviewed a girl who was in the Coast Guard who worked on those kind of boats that that rescues my character twice.
Mm.
And well, the easy thing for this, and I know I'll do other books later, we'll actually have to do things where people see what's happening. But with June, there was a scene with where she was at a crime scene, and they want to work the crime scene, and she's in a bathroom. And every time I had a police detective who would read the scene and go, okay, no plastic, no this, no this, no that, you got this wrong, you got this wrong. And I'd rewrite it, and he'd look at it and go and just laugh. You got this wrong, you got that. Finally, I wrote it where she closes her eyes and she never opens them, and she hears all this stuff going around, and she doesn't say. I thought that's the only way I could get through that scene. So for this series, that's what happens. She pays no attention when someone's explaining how something works. She just doesn't listen.
Well, and I do think that's the level of detail. When you look at someone who wrote Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian.
Yes.
The people who, I mean, he created a great story, but people who want to know the level of oxygen to this and all of those details, that is a kind of an expectation in that genre. But I think cozy mysteries, there are just different levels of what readers are expecting and how detailed you need to go. And then it's also like, well, what is this delivering emotionally to the reader? I think that's the other, that's the other piece.
Yeah. And thankfully for my case, it works with June's whole not paying attention to anything, missing out on life, because she just doesn't care. She just wants to sit in her hot tub and drink her rum and not worry about it and avoid her brother's crazy fans. It's been a fun series to write. So you're going to work on horror next?
So yes, so Reenu-You was part of this longer novel that I may mine for other stories, like parallel stories, for that world, so to speak. But I am supposed to deliver a horror novel in the next couple of months, and that should be out at the end of the year, fingers crossed. And that will be a very different, it'll be I would say in some ways a more traditional horror novel, whereas Reenu-You is more sci-fi with some elements of psychological horror. So that is something I'm contracted for, have a deadline, and then I am trying to, for myself, work on this cozy mystery, which I may be reaching out to you about.
Please do, yeah.
I did a NaNoWriMo draft many years ago, and I'm just going through and now making it like from the NaNoWriMo like baby draft, which into like a real draft. And so I'm just trying to revise that and get through, and then kind of see where I am. And I like to hop around a bit.
Yeah, it's you get bored in the same genre. As a screenwriter, I could write anything, but as a novelist, if I write in two different genres, people freak out, and I don't get that.
Right. Because I like to read. I as we were talking about the very beginning, I pretty much will read just about anything in terms of fiction. And I don't read a lot of epic fantasy, but I'm not opposed to it. I'm not like, oh my goodness, I will never read this. But some people have very strong preferences. And so, we'll have to see, one, if the mystery is strong enough that it can move forward. But if I'm going to write something really outside of speculative fiction, can I use it under my name, or do I have to create a different persona? I know a lot of writers, write in different fields under different names.
Yeah, I've got a sci-fi. Yeah, I've got a sci-fi piece that I'm going to be doing. I think it's either 3 or 5 books. I just have to figure out how much of a story there is. So, but it's really exciting. And my husband keeps saying, when are you going to write that one? And I'm going to use a pen name for that one.
Okay.
But I think, with the cozy, if you can figure out, either a city or a character that you can take from place to place, that thing that really makes the cozy really cool for me anyway is that character, that lead character. There's a series that I interviewed the girl, and I'm so sorry I'm not going to remember her name. Hillcrest Witches is the series, and there's a little town, and there's a dimension. There's a gap between the dimensions, and they work on keeping the town safe. And it's really cool series.
Mm-hmm.
And Emmerich Anderson, maybe.
Mm.
I might be getting her confused with somebody else. I'm sorry, Emmerich, if I am. I think that's the author, but I'll look it up and I'll correct myself in the beginning. So she's got this really cool town with all these characters and these witches. So, if you can find that, that's something. Like some people do culinary.
Well, and I think
I love
fashion.
food.
I think
Fashion would be great.
and the character, and it's kind of set in Raleigh right now. But the character I definitely could see moving through a series. So, but you're right, like trying to make her. And it was interesting what you were saying earlier about your character. It sounds like your character doesn't necessarily the arc. A lot of cozy series, really, in a lot of mysteries, generally, the character doesn't always change dramatically from book to book. Like there's these kind of gradual changes. So that's why, I kind of fall in love with characters, and that's usually how I start writing. I'm trying to also think about plot and conflict, but usually I'll start with a character.
Yeah, that person that you want to spend time with. They've got to be somebody that you want to spend time with, because you could be with them for a really long time if the audience really likes them. Really long time.
Fingers crossed. Right?
Yeah. It's like, oh my God, what? I forget, there was some movie where the writer absolutely hated their character, was trying to figure out a way to kill off the character, because the world loved the character and the writer hated the character. I just can't remember what book it might have been American Dreamer with JoBeth Williams and Tom Conti, which you can't find, unfortunately. I love that movie, where he wrote, it wasn't romance. I think it was like, yeah, because Count Ranelagh was one of the bad guys in his book, and these things happened, but he didn't. His mother was his pen name, and she would go to the book signings and sign the books, and he didn't want people to know it was him that wrote the books. So that.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, it's great. I loved him as an actor. He's great, except they killed his character in Friends. He did that. He played Ross's wife to be Emily's drunk father, and it's like, oh, what a waste of Tom Conti, such a great actor. But that's a fun one to look for too, because JoBeth Williams was fantastic in it. So if people want to find you, do you have a mailing list so people can get ready for the horror book if they want to?
Oh my goodness, I unfortunately I don't have a mailing list for my fiction, but if you go to the Practice of Creativity, and I'll just spell it out, it's Michele Berger, Michele with one L, Michele, Berger, Berger, .wordpress.com. They'll find ways to contact me, and I would love to put them on a list. As well as I do have starting a list, my sister and I, for people who like kind of modern fantasy with dark elements, so I can direct them in all sorts of places. So, and if they're writers, the Practice of Creativity has a lot of resources for writers too. But yeah, and I'm on Twitter at Michele T. Berger, and I'm active on there. And my Facebook page, my author Facebook page, is my full name, Michele Tracy Berger. So come find me, come play with me, let's talk, let's connect. It'd be great.
That sounds good. And I will put all of those links in the show notes. If you're listening, sometimes I forget that we're actually doing a podcast. And and then like we met each other through the Queer Author Summit, and I interviewed Jay and Zach on my show. And at one point I was sitting there listening to Jay talk, and I forgot that I was interviewing him. I thought I was watching. I said to Zach later, what a moron, because all of a sudden it was dead air, and I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, I'm interviewing them. I'm not watching a podcast. And I was kind of marveling at, wow, there's his attic, and yeah, there.
That's hilarious.
So for a moment, I kind of forgot that we were doing a podcast. So if you are listening on the podcast, and I always say, if you are listening and you are in the car, make sure you pull over before you look at the show notes. And in these COVID times, you are probably at home wishing you were in your car driving somewhere. And if you are and if you want to comment, go down to the show notes and click that link, and you will comment on the YouTube page, because I can't find you if you comment on whatever app you're listening to the podcast in, because it's all over the place and I will not see it. So make sure that you go down to that comment link and you comment, and you can find Michele through all of the links there. And thank you so much for coming on. When you finish your horror book, why don't you come back and talk to us about that one?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Melissa. This was so much fun. And it just felt like talking to you in the backyard. All we needed was like a glass of rosé or something.
You
And
know,
we
we
could
probably
be
need to
off
add
and
that for the next one. We'll just sit and I'd probably start singing or something. No, we probably shouldn't drink. Probably not. Probably not. You know, I have this great bottle of Zacapa XO, and it's really expensive. It's like finished in cognac casks, so it's got just
running.
that extra sweetness to it. And I love Zacapa. It's a rum. It's my favorite rum.
Ooh.
And so my sister sent me that for Christmas, and no, for my birthday. And I had to laugh because I told her the manuscript that I just finished, that's what June is drinking in the manuscript, or she tries to. She gets a glass of it and it gets knocked out of her hand, and she's like,
Oh,
ah,
oh
the
no.
XO, you know, the stuff that you have to special order. Ah. So anyway,
Oh.
so I will let you go. And like I said, everybody, drop down to the show notes. You will find all those links to find Michele and her books. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michele. I can't wait till she comes back with her horror book. I really love horror. I say that all the time. That genre, I really love that genre. Um, it's a book. I love books. Anyway, so that's it for this week. I've got some great shows lined up for you in future weeks, so make sure you keep coming back. And if you were, like I said earlier in the show at the beginning, if you're an author or you have a book I absolutely have to read, let me know. Go down to the show notes, click on that link. It will take you to the YouTube page, and that's where I will find everything. If you don't want to mention your book on the YouTube page, you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on my my website. You can contact me through there. It is just like it sounds, melissabanczak.com, Melissa, B as in boy, A as in apple, Nczak, and I'll have it in the show notes too. And I'm going to go off and do some writing. I got to get these next books finished. And I guess that's it. I'm kind of, let's see, I was thinking there was something else I was going to tell everybody. I don't know. Anyway, I've been sitting in my office too long today. So I'm going to go get some lunch. You go read a good book.